I don't have any fancy visuals. I'm just going to tell some stories. We could rerun Jacob's images, though, and it would work just perfectly for mine. If I hit this button, will it do that? No, maybe, maybe not. I decided to just briefly talk about things that happened within a half mile of where we're sitting. We all kind of forget rock history. EMP was not here at one point. This was literally essentially an empty lot at one point. When I came to Seattle and first started seeing music in 1975, where the QFC was a free parking, just an open gravel lot. Tower Records hadn't been constructed, and you could park there when you'd go to any kind of show. But Seattle Center has been a place where lots of rock history has happened. First, EMP. Many people don't realize that the initial concept for EMP was actually to call it the Jimi Hendrix Museum. Paul Allen had seen Jimi Hendrix play in one of the few shows that he did in Seattle when he came back at the Seattle Center Coliseum. That changed his life, and he cited many times that's what kind of got him to be creative in everything he did. And his concept with this museum was to call it the Jimi Hendrix Museum. The Hendrix estate was having a very messy estate fight, which still continues on years and years later. I kind of think, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this in EMP or I'll be struck down with a laser beam from space, Paul loaned a lot of money to Al Hendricks to win back control of the estate, and yet Al didn't want this museum to be called the Jimi Hendrix Museum. So consequently, you're an EMP. Maybe that's for the best because the museum has had a wider thing, not being named the Jimi Hendrix Museum. Maybe we wouldn't have a Nirvana Taking Punk to the Masses exhibit if that were the case. Hendrix was born in Harborview Hospital, not very far away. After he moved away when he was 18, he only came back to play 4 shows, and 3 of them were within a half mile of where we were. The first one was at they used the arena, a building that's not used at all anymore, and he played the Seattle Center Coliseum. Those shows were, called the Homecoming shows. They were quite legendary. Many people saw them. But the one thing that people forget is that Seattle had a very delicate history of racial politics. We like to think of this city as a very liberated and very integrated community. It was not in the era that Hendrix grew up. He rarely even went north of Denny Way. Denny Way for musicians in Seattle was the unofficial race line. No black musicians would get a gig in a venue north of Denny Way. Consequently, if this was in that era, no way Jimi Hendrix would have been able to play at EMP because there were 2 separate musicians' unions. There was a white musicians' union. White musicians could play anywhere they wanted, but the white musicians' union controlled north of Denny Way. If you were African American, the only venues that were open to you were south of Denny Way, and that lasted until the late 60s. It was not something that was abolished very early on. So, in any case, Hendrix, when he played in Seattle, almost everywhere he played before he moved away were in clubs in the International District or in the Central District. But he came back, he played those infamous homecoming shows. Jimmy's public memorial was held at what was called the Armory, which is, if any of you had lunch at the Seattle Center House, Miles Davis came and jammed in there where you ate pizza or pasta or whatever you ate. Imagine that, Miles Davis there. The interesting thing about that is Miles didn't even go to his own mother's funeral, and he came to Jimmy's funeral. So jumping forward, the Seattle Center Coliseum was also where the Beatles played. For Ann and Nancy Wilson, who I wrote my most recent book about, seeing the Beatles there was the most important moment of their youth. They all wore matching Beatles outfits. They wanted to look exactly like the Beatles. Their mom, however, unfortunately had seen the wrong picture in the paper. The Beatles switched and they had 2 different outfits. And so they showed up wearing matching Beatle outfits, but they looked nothing like the people on stage. But they cite that day as Beatle Day, and every day they celebrate that as if it were their birthday. They all text each other and call each other on Beatle Day. Ironically, Hart, a dozen years after seeing the Beatles there, would then headline 1978, New Year's Eve, totally sold out, absolutely insane, the same venue that they saw the Beatles at. Hart also has played in EMP a few times. They even filmed a DVD live at Sky Church, just right next door. Kurt Cobain never went to EMP. It didn't exist in his era. He always claimed that the first concert he ever saw was at the Mountaineers Club, which is a Black Flag show. He was there, but that was not his first concert. His first concert was Sammy Hagar in Quarter Flash, again at the Seattle Center Coliseum. He bought a t-shirt, he wore it to school the next day. He never told an interviewer that, never mentioned it, always lied about his first show. He also apparently threw up on the way to Sammy Hagar and Quarter Flash, so probably somewhere in Seattle Center grounds there should be a memorial that talks about Kurt Cobain vomiting somewhere near here. Probably more than a few places around. Nirvana played at the Seattle Center Coliseum in 1992. It was the local premiere of Rape Me and a number of songs that would later end up in Utero. And their last show ever in Seattle happened at the Arena. Again, this venue that a lot of major rock shows happened, and it's now completely unused on the other side of the Memorial Stadium. What's interesting to note about that, and I think history ends up being very revisionist, this is 1994. If Nirvana were to announce they were playing today and Kurt were alive, or they would be playing Quest Field, or whatever the heck they call that now. In 1994, In Utero was not as big a hit album as Nevermind had been, and they ended up playing a couple of shows at the Arena, but that's a much smaller venue that held about 5,000 people, not the size of Key Arena. Just a couple other pieces of Cobain memorabilia that some of you may not be aware of, but at one point, Courtney Love wanted Kurt Cobain's ashes to be interred in EMP. I don't know how much anyone that works at EMP even knows the story. Jacob's shaking his head. There was a little bit of controversy. I ended up being involved because, unfortunately, my phone occasionally rings and it's Courtney on the other line. But she wanted him interred somewhere. And some of the people at EMP, I don't know if anybody in this room had any say in that, thought that the security hassles of having his ashes here would be too great. Then the proposal was put him outside, have a memorial garden where people could visit. Bad idea, whoever at EMP decided not to have that happen. That would have brought in a lot of people, and it would have been a central point for people to have a place to memorialize him in a way. So he almost was buried here, he was not. But he continues on in the exhibits upstairs, he continues on, and obviously Jimi Hendrix, some of the clothes that he wore at those first homecoming shows you can find upstairs. So that's it, thanks.